Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Tal Heinrich, a spokesperson for the Israeli Prime Minister's office. This is day 84 of the October 7th war. We begin with our latest figures. Since Hamas launched their murderous attacks against Israeli citizens on October 7th, over 13,000 rockets have been fired at Israel. 2,000 of those rockets landed within Gaza, causing tremendous destruction within the Strip. This morning, the IDF death toll increased from 501 to 502, following the death of 33-year-old Captain Harel Shavit. We send Harel's friends and family our heartfelt condolences. 129 hostages are currently held by terror groups within Gaza, including now 23 hostages who have been killed while in captivity. We learned yesterday that one of the hostages, 70-year-old Israeli-American Judith Weinstein, has been slaughtered by Hamas following her abduction. Judith's husband, 73-year-old Gad Haggai, was murdered by Hamas on October 7th. His body is also being held by the terrorist regime. President Biden expressed his devastation at this horrible news, and we call on more world leaders to join us in bringing home each and every hostage. If you stand for human rights, international law, and basic decency, you should be enthusiastically echoing our call. Bring them home. Prime Minister Netanyahu met yesterday with the families of 28 hostages and reaffirmed that the Israeli government is engaging in round-the-clock efforts to secure the hostages' release. While much of our efforts to release the hostages are extremely sensitive and thus not fit for public disclosure, our promise is clear. No one will be left behind. Though it has been 84 days since innocent children, women, and men were brutally abducted and slaughtered, time has stood still for the hostages, their families, and the victims of the October 7th massacre. Just yesterday, we heard chilling testimony from 21-year-old Mia Shem, who was held by Hamas terrorists for 55 days after being abducted from the Nova Music Festival. Mia describes being brutally kidnapped, undergoing surgery at the hands of a veterinarian without anesthesia, and being hidden in a family's home with the family's full knowledge and participation. More details of her account will be revealed later tonight. Also yesterday, the New York Times published a horrifying, almost unbearably explicit article describing Hamas's use of rape and genital mutilation as a weapon of war. The Times' ongoing investigation has established that sexual violence was not the exception, but was instead the rule in Hamas's barbaric attacks. We look to all women's rights organizations, and especially to UN Women, and wonder if this bombshell article and its excruciating detail will catch their attention. We remind you that it took UN Women 55 days to condemn Hamas's use of rape as a weapon of war. Unfortunately, they are still dragging their feet, failing to fire their Deputy Chief of Peace and Security, Sarah Douglas, after she violated the UN's own code of conduct. As you may recall from our earlier briefings, Douglas had endorsed over 150 pro-Hamas tweets since October 7th. It is not enough for UN Women to merely recognize these violations. We call on them to cut ties with Sarah Douglas immediately, entirely, and indefinitely. Israeli women are tired of begging for the minimum levels of sympathy from the organizations who purport to stand for us. Enough is enough. Do your job. And now for a brief humanitarian update. This past Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, the UN requested that we close the Kerem Shalom crossing for aid inspections due to congestion on the Gaza side. Israel continues to have excess capacity for the inspection and passage of aid trucks into Gaza, and we place no limit on the amount of humanitarian supplies which can enter the Strip. Suggesting otherwise is a fallacy. Unfortunately, though we have emphasized this message for weeks now, it is clearly not getting through. Martin Griffiths, the UN's Undersecretary General for Humanitarian Affairs, just listed 14 reasons why it is difficult to get aid into Gaza. Now, perhaps you can already guess the terrorist group he failed to mention. That's right. He makes no mention of the Hamas death cult that steals aid and funnels it into their tunnels. We encourage Mr. Griffiths to drastically revise the way he discusses this conflict. It is possible to be even-handed while also condemning terrorists. Denying reality leaves no one better off. I am now happy to take your questions. Do we have questions today? If you have questions, feel free to type them in the chat box. You can also send them in the mail prior to the daily briefings. We will be happy to address them. We will wait a bit more. Mm-hmm.
The first question comes from Yoshimoto, a public broadcaster in Japan. Reports from a human rights institution indicate widespread destruction at cemetery sites in the Gaza Strip amid military operations, and our satellite imagery analysis confirms damage at several sites, including in Gaza City, Khan Yunis, and Jabalia. Do you have any comments on these observations?
Thank you for your question. I have not seen this report, so I can't address it directly. What I can tell you, though, is that the IDF targets terrorists and terror infrastructure in Gaza. That's it. Mm-hmm.
The next question comes from Jim Williams of Zenger International News. Tal, as we enter 2024, are there any hostage exchange for a pause in the war deal on the table, other than the recent Egyptian proposal? Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Jim. As I stated in the briefings, we said, the government said, the Prime Minister said that we will pursue every avenue to bring about the release of the hostages. We demand that all of them will be released immediately and unconditionally. But as you know, we're dealing with a terrorist organization, the barbaric Hamas terrorists who carried out the October 7th massacre. Now, as we continue to exert military pressure on Hamas, we also hope to create the conditions that will bring about the release of more hostages, as we have seen before, per the outline that was agreed upon, the one that Hamas has broke early December. But we cannot expand any further than that because, as you know, human lives hang in the balance here. Mm-hmm.
What is the Prime Minister's office response to the recent IDF investigations on the killing of Israeli hostages by the IDF and the heavy collateral damage in the December 24th Gaza strike? Does this suggest a need to revisit the conduct of the war in Gaza?
Well, we said before that it's a very, very tragic incident and it should not have happened. We learned difficult lessons, and our forces are implementing the lessons that we learned. And we already addressed this issue very extensively. The neighborhood in Gaza where this incident took place is a very, very difficult, complex battle zone. As you know, Hamas terrorists, they wore civilian clothing. They tried to lure in our forces by playing sound in Hebrew, even of children. It's full of ambushes, and there are very, very difficult decisions for our soldiers to take into account at any given moment on the ground there, and specifically in that neighborhood of Shajaiya, where this has taken place. So we hug the families of these hostages, at this difficult moment for all of us. All right. Thank you for joining us for the daily briefing. That concludes the briefing for today.